So you're making me think about the different platforms that we're approaching in the project that I'm working on, Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie, and the horizontalization, if that's the right word, of all the screens that we're using. And I wonder, for each of you, we're talking about television here because, we use a remote control and we turn on the television, but when you're producing in this disruptive model, how attuned are you to the different screens and the different ways in which people are going to be accessing this content? Madeline?
Well, I have to say that model that Chloe just described sounds awfully like documentary from time to time.
Yeah, for sure.
Look, I suppose I haven't really been thinking of myself particularly as a disruptive producer, but I do think that we are in a volatile time and that technology is changing, which is disruptive, and that models of kind of funding have radically changed, which is disruptive from the other end, and so you simply have to adapt and change or just get out. I guess you just expect your content to be consumed literally in every possible way you can. I've been quite interested to notice how much I look at things silently. like really most of the time I'm kind of scrolling through my phone. If I check on Facebook, I don't have the sound on. I'm just looking at it as a silent piece of material. I've been thinking a bit about that. So either you kind of caption it or you shoot things in ways that kind of tell your stories or communicate what you want in ways that don't require sound. It's kind of quite a strange way to think about it. Isn't it a beautiful throwback to the way film started, but bizarre and weird in its own way? I think that you also expect, I suppose, to be less precious about your storytelling. Like, I just think stories can be told in 2 minutes, they can be told in 2 hours, and every length in between. So it's breaking down the old models of the broadcast hour, which is for many decades has been kind of just the way you made stories. And so, instead of just thinking about the 2-minute piece as being kind of the thing that doesn't really matter, it actually matters very much. It might be the thing that gets seen much more than the 1 hour or the feature film. It's really, and you expect that your story will need to communicate effectively, compellingly, dramatically at these different sizes. I think that you're always interested in how a documentary can kind of engage an audience really deeply, and it's a good story. You have to have a great story at the basis of everything, drama or documentary. If you don't have a great story, you don't have people to watch it. They won't watch stuff that's not good. There's just too much stuff out there. So, but I guess with documentary there is this kind of feeling that you're attempting to kind of make the world a bit better. I am kind of an optimist, and at my heart, I think it would be nice to feel that we make a difference that is, leave some difference in the world, and I clearly have some faith that media can deliver that, which it can and it can't. It can be part of a bigger system that kind of changes things, and that's, I guess, the impact model, which is that you have a tool, a film as a tool, basically, and if you can wrap it around with the right partners and the right distribution model, you might actually achieve some of your social change ambitions.
Chloe?
Yeah, so I sort of loops back to something that Graham Mason was saying this morning about knowing, who are you making the thing for, and I think in the emerging space, I think it's a really strong thing to be going in and saying, I'm making this for Facebook, heck, we'll go for it, or I'm making this as a Vine series, or I'm making, I think outside the box, and you're exactly right, you're making things for a particular audience, and if you're learning at a first step, how do I do that in practice, choose a very specific audience and make something for that and nail that one thing and go, oh, okay, that worked, what did I do there, take that learning practice, and then I'll go after YouTube next, and then next I'll go after iView, and then next I'm going to go after ABC One, and then when I get ABC One I'm going to go international, So I actually see that as quite a good training ground. But look, I think you really are looking at the platform that you're making for. You're looking who are the people at consuming it, how are they consuming it, are they consuming it silently? Mobile, for example, I sat in a lecture about 12 months ago with someone that said mobile content at the moment is, and in advertising in particular, is 30% of the type of advertising that we currently make, and by 2 years' time it's going to go up to like 87%. So there's this whole market there, 57% growth in mobile. So if you're going to specialise in somewhere, go to mobile. You know, what can you as producers do that's just for mobile? Like target something specifically in that area, and that's a growth market. You know, when everything else is talking about decline and drama budgets are coming down and blah blah. You know, like go to where the growth is and see if you can actually own that market, and then take what you learn in that space and apply it to the next platform.
Look, it makes me think about audiences, and it makes me think about how you with the fragmentation and with moving into different platforms and having different content all across each platform, all adding up to the one particular story. How can you, or what do you do in your own organisations to shape up and harness an audience? What considerations do you put forward for that?
Well, it depends. Well, I mean, I guess it becomes a rather organic process of working out what stories you're telling. So,
does it shape the campaign?
Well, yes. I mean, it does. I suppose if you're going to do a social impact film and you're planning to run a social impact campaign around it, you actually the first thing you do is well, is there a tribe around it? Like, do you already have an audience on social media and online that will can be engaged with? You know, like if you've got someone was in a session today, they have a piece of something on YouTube and they've got 12 million viewers. Okay, you have an audience that you can speak to. Like, that's actually really interesting. So, and she's trying to develop, I don't know if she's here, trying to develop a documentary around it. So it's like, well, okay, well, clearly that's going to interest people because you already have a really large kind of base there. If you can translate what you've already done into a longer form piece, you've probably got a very good chance of distributing that back to them, and of, funding what it is that you're making. Right now we've got things coming in, but for example, what are we going to do? We're making a film. We've got some development to do a film in National Geographic. It's called Chocageddon. It's about chocolate Armageddon, and it's essentially a film about climate change and food security, two very serious issues. But we kind of look, there's a highly polarised debate. Either you believe or you don't. If you believe, great, we don't need to talk to you. You're already on board. But if you don't believe in it or you're on the fence, actually that's who we do want to talk to. So Chocageddon is basically kind of a fun way into a serious subject. There was this debate. There's been this issue about chocolate production. It dived. Is it climate change? What's going on? Why are we looking seriously at a world without chocolate? What would that look like? So this is a film that investigates that premise, and along the way it will kind of wind into it these issues around climate change, about food production, about food security, all told in a very engaging way with kind of interesting characters and chocolate. I mean, there's great. We've got Mars as a partner. And we have National Geographic, so we've got distribution, we've got an interesting kind of partner. We think we could have a lot of fun with the storytelling, and that would be a really fun impact campaign to run, wouldn't it? It could be all sorts of things about, quite specific things about consumer actions, like where's your chocolate bar come from, to quite big things like what are we doing about climate change, like what are we literally doing on a political level about climate change. It's clearly looking at an audience. It's not a political film. It's looking at a kind of a consumer audience and trying to kind of assuming everything goes right, that will really engage this new audience around a topic that we think need to be drawn into it on the side of science.
Thank you. That really speaks to what Graham was talking about this morning in that assume that you're not going to get any money from any funding bodies and think laterally sideways about that and approach it in a different way. I look forward to seeing that.
Me too.
What about you, Chloe? Is your organisation thinking about future audiences and how to snare them through a disruptive model?
Yeah, so look, one thing that we have realised is that I can't remember the demographics exactly, but 17 to 30-year-olds almost are just dropping out of the TV market. They're not watching, free-to-air, pay TV. They're going for on-demand content or finding content wherever they want to. And so the bigger players are really struggling with how to reach this audience. So if you're online, if you're doing things a little bit differently, that is who your audience is. So all of a sudden, there will come a time when specialists for that particular audience will be called upon by the bigger players. Because that's who they need extra market share, and that's who they're missing. In particular, in the feature world, it's that demo is not going to the cinemas. Where are they watching their content? So I think as that demo ages, people that have worked in that disruptive space are the best place to go after them in new spaces, or in fact existing spaces, but that they know how the audience likes to watch and what they're watching. And so we're tracking that sort of younger audience very specifically. We also, I guess, looking at Here Come the Habibs, which is very much a standard network show. We have been playing around with a few things that looking at younger characters doing little bits of spin-off content and stuff like that to try and pull audiences, into the main show. That hasn't been 100% successful, but at least we're starting to work with the networks to think and talk about that sort of stuff. So I think that's the growing area. It's that increasing bracket of people that aren't watching traditional TV. Although I think the numbers are still quite high, 90% or something that are still going there. That will only decline as that younger demo moves in. So I think if you're making content for that demographic that isn't watching traditional streams, you're very well placed for the next evolution of where content goes and what happens.
Which brings us really to the elephant in the room, and that is digital rights, and how the industry is going to cope with that evolution. Would each of you tell me how much of that enters into the conversation of your business?
In terms of negotiating with funders or ourselves?
Yourselves as a commercial operation?
The premise is you have a piece of creative content that has value in a marketplace and that people pay to consume it, and that's how you make a living, basically. So anybody in this room that's got any interest in being paid for making films will be interested in how we price them and how we distribute them at a fee. Who were we saying that piracy, like Australia is one of the highest rates of piracy in the world? There's a great little meme that goes around that I think we brought up this morning it's about, look, you'll pay $4 for a cup of coffee, but people won't pay $1.99 for a song, that a composer is kind of poured, like literally this is the distillation of their soul. It's online for $1.99 and people won't pay for it. And it's true, it does seem like victimless crime, and we've all kind of probably downloaded stuff for free over the years. But when you really think it through, it's actually a terrible liability for us. Unless we can find some ways to kind of monetize what we do, there's no hope for you to ever be paid for your jobs as a creative person. You'll just have to simply teach or, do something else that kind of pays the bills and makes stuff on the sides. So it's a real issue. I don't really know how to solve it. I don't think we're doing a very good job about educating ourselves about the value of things. If you love something, support it, don't kill it. I guess that's how I feel about it, and I don't really know how to kind of solve it. I do know that all our films end up on YouTube at some point, and you look at them, there's been 10,000 views, and you go, if everybody's paid $1 for that view, it would make an enormous difference to our kind of our sustainability. We're a small organisation. We really struggle for all the money we get. We often have gaps, where we just sort of finance it until we can get paid. Literally the back end on our productions is very meaningful to us and will be to you guys if you make stuff and put it out there. So I don't know, it's a cultural shift, I guess, that we need to change, and I suspect we need a great deal of work at every level of advocacy to do that.
To be frank, we don't expect any revenue from those content. We don't see it. We have been successful in getting multi-platform funding, so it gets paid for through the production budget. So the people that work on it at the time get paid. In terms of the back end, we see it more as marketing collateral, driving audiences back to the main entity. Do I think that will change? Not in the short term. No, for us it's all about getting eyeballs, back to the main game.
And really, branded content and kind of live events. That's kind of the only, isn't it? Graham was saying this morning, live events might, kind of like the way broadcast TV is interested, eventising things basically, because that is something that kind of forces people to kind of engage with it in a way that can be kind of managed. You know, the ABC is doing 3 nights in a row of stargazing. I mean, obviously we're not paying for that. That's something that's part of the broadcaster. But they're using the eventising model to draw audience to this high-profile series that they've got. They're running it over 3 consecutive nights, not 3 weeks. You know, blah blah blah. They're sort of trying new ways of dragging in a younger audience. Probably they've launched a whole lot of educational materials for it. That's clearly about the younger markets, families watching, yeah. So yeah.
Well, thank you. And before we throw to questions, I would just like to say don't give up, because we do need to fund the work that we do. And I think if we continue to sit in the status quo, we're never going to dissolve and evolve for the children who don't know the difference between online and offline, because they're just completely online in their entire lives. So what is the business model going to be going forward from that? So I know SPA has an initiative at the moment, which is, starting to move towards lobbying the government to look at copyright law again. And so I just think that...
And content quotas. I mean, content quotas are actually what makes Australian industry survive, and they don't have any online stuff. So it's like that will, it will essentially kind of eat itself up.
Yes.
But content quotas for broadcast television insist on a certain baseline. 20% of content has to be produced in Australia. There's kind of ways around it, like if you produce stuff in New Zealand, and cooking shows and all kinds of things count as Australian content. But it provides a base level of industry kind of just busyness that keeps people working. Like, so you keep skilled crew, here working. You can learn your craft because you can get a job and do stuff. And the other thing is it keeps producers going because culturally keeps our stories alive, because we have a platform, because the broadcasters have to tell a certain amount of Australian content. And there have been notable, if you look at the history of Australian cinema, or there's been notable times where we haven't supported our local cultural industries, and they just die in the arse. And there were, the reason why there was a resurgence of filmmaking in the 70s was because there was a tax break. But before that, there was this huge area where we just didn't have anything. And there was, between the 20s and the 50s, very little got made in Australia. And that was also alongside a time when there was no kind of really considered and ongoing support. Whitlam brought it in with the help of people like Philip Adams and a few people. We're very vulnerable because we're small, and we don't have a big audience market here, so we can't sustain ourselves. We will never be able to sustain ourselves the way America has its own market and can just live on its own content, the way China has its own kind of inbuilt audience and can live on what it produces within itself internally. So we will always be very vulnerable, and we rely on having kind of the structures in place, government structures and funding in place in order to sustain it. And that is actually going, and I think it's nice to say that we'll just have to be very nimble and adapt and find ways, and I think that people will, but it will be extremely difficult, and there'll be much fewer of us doing it, is my sense of it.
And I don't know if you've done any VR. We've just shot our first VR short film, narrative comedy. Whoa, what an experience. I didn't know much about VR going into it, certainly know everything that we did wrong having shot it. Could I do it again? I wish I could. But it's not from a narrative perspective. It's not a narrative story that drives in one direction. You almost have to write a script that's got sort of 8 concurrent stories running, because as the viewer, you're sort of directing where you're putting your focus. So in a way, you're sort of directing which narrative you're following. I find it such an immersive experience. I did a whole bunch of research in the lead up to the shoot, and actually took the headset home and put it on my daughter. It was just to hear her say, "Mum, I'm on a boat and I'm fishing with some fishermen." In her head, she's thinking she's right there doing that thing at that moment. It's so immersive. So I think that the possibilities are going to be amazing, I think. But in terms of harnessing it, I think we're quite a ways from actually being able to do that in a narrative sense. I think in the documentary space, what I've seen is amazing, because it takes you and transports you to places and situations that you would not normally find yourself in. So that's where I find it really engaging. But in a story sense, I think there's a long way to go and a lot of learning to happen before we can actually tell stories well. Because from a VR point of view, the companies that first got onto VR have that digital gaming sort of background, and whilst the technology is sort of increasing, I think the actual storytelling capacity is not kept up with the speed of the technology. But Madeline, what do you think?
I'd agree with that. Look, I actually don't know much about it, to be honest. Like, we've had a few things come our way that kind of didn't progress, and so it just isn't an area that I've particularly kind of had a chance to really explore. But I mean, look, you know, we will have to, and it will be interesting to see where it goes. There's a film producer in Australia, John Maynard, who's been doing this dome. It's not VR, but it's dome, really immersive event-based experiences, and we were kind of invited to do something with that. It's so lovely. There's a Coral project. I don't know if you've seen it. It sort of tours. It's been touring a bit, like it's toured around the world actually, but it's in Australia, in Sydney at the moment. And so I don't know. Like I'm always loved new technology. It's great fun to experiment with it. If there was kind of like a project that came past us, I'd love to know more about it, but I can't talk about it.
It's a good time to jump on because no one really knows what they're doing, you know. So you're in the same position as everyone else. But from a sound perspective, in particular, Kyle's, I think sound has so much more dimension and stakes, I think, in a VR story than in a standard story, because almost, you know, the sound is actually agitating you to, you know, turn around and focus on that thing. So I think it just adds so many more layers in, you know, what you need to conceive and the levels of creativity that sort of need to wrap around the central film. But yeah.
Interesting that you say that. One of our students who's graduating tonight, his final creative project was a piece from War of the Worlds where he just created the sound, you know, just a 3D sound, and just a full immersive experience.
Yep.
Fabulous. So clearly, that's where we're moving.
Yep.
Yeah. Way stuff works is that even if you're not aware of it, the ownership of a piece of media rests with somebody. You know, the filmmaker, the production company, some entity owns it, and what you get with a DVD is a private license to screen it at home. So if you take it and then kind of rip it off the DVD and then stick it on a public YouTube platform, essentially what you're doing is kind of taking a piece of. You didn't have the rights to do that. You had a license simply to play it for your own personal enjoyment at home with, you know, people around the house or something like that. You don't have the right to then go and put it in a cinema or put it on a video on demand platform. So if you do that and then people watch it, they're kind of denying the income that would have been generated by like kind of a legitimate but paying for it. And I guess like we're hampered by like the prices probably need to be at a point where people will pay for stuff, and you need to have really quick access to it. Like there's a whole set of situations which encourage people to kind of pay for things, and Australia, the preconditions of that haven't existed here. You know, we haven't had access to stuff, and so people kind of rip it off from overseas. It's just a comment really that to survive you have to find some way of paying to make these things. Unless you plan to work for free, not charge anything for your stuff and have a different job, then we'll have to find some way in which we can pay for stuff so that we can all survive.
Well, I haven't done crowdfunding before, but we did quite deeply think and talk about doing crowdsourced visual effects at one stage for a project where we were planning on shooting it and then farming out different scenes and things to people around the world to kind of comp in their stuff and then piece it all back together. I was really excited about that, the thought of crowdsourced creativity, but in the end we had deliverable deadlines, and that process wasn't going to fit with that. Also, but that is a project that I would like to do at one stage. I think that would be really interesting. Yeah. So yeah, you know, not sourcing the finance but sourcing the input.
And people do crowdfunding for films all the time. Sometimes it's really successful. You know, it's people. Like if you've got an audience behind you already and you can convince them that it's worth giving you some money, that's the most effective way of doing it, isn't it? I mean, Good Pitch in a sense was a kind of crowdfunding, but to a very niche audience that had a large amount of money to give. So Good Pitch gets 300 people in a room who have been kind of primed to be interested in giving to social impact documentary, and then there's lots of kind of pitching going on, and at the end of the day it's like an auction, you know, for who wants to give to this film or this issue, and so people kind of crowdfund in a kind of small niche kind of audience. Crowdfunding online is just like, it's a global audience, like it's happening all the time really, and more and more it's a part of people's financing plans. Well, you pay for it. You will pay for it. It just will be how transparent it is, like whether you hand over money and get a piece of content, or whether you pay for it because it's branded content, or it's like hidden in other ways. Like if you want people to be professionally making stories, they will be paid in some fashion. The the only question in my mind is like, do you pay for it? Like, we're actually paying for content through the ABC through our taxes. I think that's a great way to pay for content myself. Or you pay for it on iTunes and you actually pay, you know, a few dollars for an episode or something. Or, you know, if you get something for free online, someone's paid for it. You know, like someone sponsored it, you've paid for it in some other way through the goods that you buy, and the profit from that good goes into making the content that you then consume in some fashion. Like, I don't think there's a question of whether you pay for it. It's just what is the transparency behind the mechanism of payment. And that other question about the crowdfunding, it's true. Like, I mean, the thing is, I don't think I would run a crowdfunding campaign unless there was some extraordinary audience that kind of just was there and easy to kind of access. But you might consider running a crowdfunding campaign as a way of building your market for your eventual distribution of your film. I mean, one of the things we were talking about before is that previously there was a very lineal kind of sense of like, you have an idea, you get funding, you go to production, you go to distribution, and then you market at the end. And now, of course, it's all different. Like, it's all collapsed together. So, you know, if you crowdfund, you're essentially marketing your final film already. You're building your audience at the same time as you're financing. And you just kind of keep circling round and round on that. There was a film a few years ago called Indie Game. It was one of the first, or possibly the first, film about the gaming community that came out, and it did a really successful. It was very smart filmmakers. They saw there was sort of no one had done a film about this community. They had an interest in it and they had connections there. They ran really successful crowdfunding campaigns and raised quite significant amounts of money. They really engaged their audience and got them really excited about the fact this film was coming down the line. They probably scared off a bit of the competition too, because they were noisy about what they were doing. And then they ran a second crowdfunding campaign halfway through, bringing their old audience and bringing the new audience, because the gamers themselves were very heavily engaged in the online space. They were kind of reporting on the filming as it was going along, so they were continuing to build. They had really good, like, interesting kind of statistics. They kind of measured themselves well. You can look it up online and find really interesting kind of breakdown of how they went about doing it. And they had a phenomenally successful distribution outcome. It was a good film. It got to Sundance, or I think that's hard, but they were given a lot of distribution offers at Sundance, and they turned them down as self-distributed it, and they did a hybrid model of kind of traditional theatrical, which was fine, but not a big money spinner. I think that probably broke even at best. What really worked for them was kind of the hosted community screening. They had Adobe went on as their sponsor, so straight away America, they had all their venues paid for, transport. They screened the film and charged tickets. People came to see it, and eventually it ended up online, and eventually at the very end, I think, on TV. So they were just smart about the way they did things, and they kind of really maximised the opportunities to kind of develop their audience and deliver to their audience. They're very active in the social space, and they made a great film as well. So it all circles around to a good film, I think.
And I think that brings us back around to where we started today with Graham as well, in that if you are looking at doing productions and everything in the same models as what they've always been done and going to the same funding sources, then you're not coming from a place of strength for moving forward, because that's not the way to be innovative and to create a business and to create a commercial mindset as well. So I think that brings us around quite nicely to try and wrap up now.
Yes. Clearly we're in a time of transition, but one thing that never goes away is the storytelling. And so the stories we've heard this afternoon from both of you, Madeline and Chloe, thank you very much. Informative and fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.